Hi there, I'm Brittany Deer, the vaccine educator here at the BC Centre for Disease Control, and this is the biological product management session. We're talking about cold chain breaks in the field, and this is subsection 3 because there's a lot of content here and I wanted to break it down into manageable bites. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about emergency management, the cold chain incident algorithm, and then finally talk about what is the vaccine stability chart that we all hear so much about. I'm going to cover this up. And let's get started. So with emergency management, most important thing is to have procedures set up in advance, assuming worst case scenario. Really the phrase, it never rains, it pours, is what you want to be thinking of when you're planning for vaccine management in an emergency situation. So we're going to think of weather anticipation, continuous monitoring and alarm systems, a designated primary and backup vaccine coordinator with emergency contact information right on the fridge, written protocols for situations where the power is likely to be out for more than 4 hours, alternate vaccine storage facility or facilities with generators and 72 hours of fuel, also very important, and often this will be your local hospital. If there's a situation where the power is likely to be out for several days, you would want to go get the vaccine, transport it under cold chain conditions, and pop it in the say the pharmacy at the hospital's fridge. There should be a process in place for that. You can ask your biological product consultant what that might be. Great. This is a newer algorithm dealing with cold chain incidents within the health authority, so you may or may not have seen it before. What you're going to do first, you look in the fridge, you find that the temperature is way, way over or way, way under what it should be. You're going to right away quarantine the affected vaccine in the refrigerator. You're going to put it in a basket. You're going to put it in a paper bag. You're going to staple it shut. You're going to write do not use right on it. Keep it in the fridge. Keep it under cold chain conditions. Pardon me. You're going to take the quarantined vaccine and you're going to put it in another fridge that's working, or put it in an insulated cooler that's working. You obviously want to get it out of the bad situation, but it's very important to quarantine it and then to keep it away from other vaccines. Next step is completing the cold chain incident form and then consulting with your biological product consultant. The biological product consultant will then make a decision. Are these vaccines still usable? If the vaccines are usable, no problem. We're going to remove the vaccine from quarantine. We're going to label them or put a dot on them as being exposed for the first time, or I guess it could be a number if there's multiple exposures, cold chain incident. And very important to be maintaining a history of exposure for affected vaccines. So if there is an additional break, both of those breaks are going to be relevant in determining whether or not the vaccine is going to be usable after the second break or third break. We hope we don't get to a third break, but just in case, got to maintain a history. You're then going to fax a copy of the cold chain incident form to the BC Centre for Disease Control Pharmacy, 604-707-2581, and use the affected vaccine, the dotted vaccine, the labeled vaccine first to avoid the chance of it getting involved in another cold chain incident, which might render it unusable. If the vaccine is not usable, you're going to complete a field return form and fax it to the biologicals desk, same number, 604-707-2581. They will then give you an authorization number along with they're going to give you an authorization number, and then you're going to return to them the vaccine along with a copy of the cold chain incident form, which will then be analyzed. Returning the vaccines to the BC Centre for Disease Control, these have already been determined to be unusable, so it doesn't matter about maintaining the cold chain. The vaccine stability chart is what the biological product consultant is going to use to determine whether or not a vaccine is usable. The biological product consultant, that's part of their responsibility. Information in the chart came from vaccine manufacturers and the World Health Organization. When it came from the vaccine manufacturers, there were a couple of sources. It could be the product monograph or other written communications, for example, direct communications in response to a query or a contract clause. There's written documentation, though, signed on letterhead for all of the information that's in there. As I said before, 0 to 2, the major concern is going to be freezing. Generally speaking, if vaccine hasn't gone below 0, there's going to be less of an effect on potency. The accuracy of your min-max thermometer or your temp tail or your say smart button, the accuracy of that monitoring device is key. You need to emphasize that unless otherwise indicated, the information in the vaccine chart is for a single exposure. And there, as I said before, there's a cumulative nature to the exposure. So you want to use it up before it has a chance to get involved in a second break, because that second break generally requires further advice from the BC CDC pharmacy. As I said before as well, with temperatures between 0 and 2 degrees, a determination was made with vaccine manufacturers saying that that's refrigerator temperature. There's no theoretical cause for concern until the vaccine has crossed that 0 degree mark. The procedure is biological product consultant or other staff member finds out about the break. Biological product monitor is either made aware or finds it herself or himself, it could be, and completes a cold chain incident form. The BPM then approaches the biological product consultant with the completed cold chain incident form. The cold chain incident form information is then compared with the vaccine stability chart to determine usability, and action is taken as directed by the chart. If there's a discrepancy between the vaccine stability chart and the incident that occurred, then pharmacy would be contacted. The cold chain incident form is faxed and they will make a determination for you. Clearly label affected vaccine, and that's when we talked about red dotting them, putting a label on them and keeping a history of them, and using that vaccine right away to avoid the possibility of a second break. Multi-dose vials that have already been entered must be discarded after any cold chain incident. The information is not good for them. It's for unreconstituted vaccines only, so a MMR that has been mixed with diluent wouldn't be, the information from the vaccine stability chart wouldn't apply to that vaccine. The absence of visible signs of freezing is not considered a viable test, but if there is any freezing at all, that is a clear indicator that there was freezing, even if it's just one little chunk that's floating around there. So even if it's partial, if there's any freezing, that vaccine is frozen, and you're going to act as if it was at 0. Unreconstituted lyophilized vaccines like MMR and Varivax, so the powdered vaccines, are not affected generally by multiple exposures below 0. Here is the vaccine stability chart. Here's what it looks like. As I said before, there are references here. In this case, it was from the product monograph and from a contract. In this case, a product monograph and an interpretation that was provided to the Quebec Ministry of Health. There's different categories. So we have a category for the product, what the actual temperature was during the cold chain incident, and then we're going to have our reference. Most of your vaccine cold chain breaks are going to fall between 8 and 25. Here's some information about some specific ones. For Boostrix, the data is different because there are different sources of information. So you'll see, for example, that the product monograph says it can be at 8 hours for 21 degrees. And in the contract clause, it says it is good for 2 weeks at 25 degrees. When you run into this type of a situation, you're going to use the more generous of the two statements. Also with Energix, good for 7 days at 37 degrees in a single exposure, or for multiple exposures totaling 24 hours at 25 degrees C. And in that case, you're going to make a determination based on what better suits the situation. Upper limits are strict on these categories. So if you've gone above 25, then you need to move on to the next category. So if you're above 25, then you're popped over here. And remember always that you're taking into account the accuracy of the thermometer. The two things that I talked about with the Boostrix, with the different information provided right there, and same thing also with the Energix. Here are some other examples of situations where you have a choice about how to categorize a break. For unreconstituted Infinrix hexa, the vaccine is good for 2 weeks at 25 degrees. Once reconstituted, it's good for 8 hours at 21 degrees. So that's an exception to what I was talking about with the MMR and for the varicella. And that's just because that information happened to have been provided, I guess, by the manufacturer. Gardasil is allowed multiple exposures up to 25 degree C, not exceeding 72 hours in total. Prevnar is allowed 3 separate exposures, each not longer than 24 hours, up to 21. Also stable at 25 degrees for 6 months and stable at 37 for 7 days. You want to consider the maximum allowable temperature and time when making decisions, and obviously more allowable exposures may be preferable, especially if it's a vaccine that you don't use often. There's no specific information for Imavax polio TD. However, the antigen is present in PDSL, for which we do have information. So the PDSL data is used to interpret breaks for that vaccine. And there's a similar process for the IPV TD polio, in which case the reference vaccine is Quadricel. When talking about the vaccine stability chart, it might be interesting to think about where might we go from here. In the future, it's hoped that manufacturers could include more of this stability information in their product monograph. The chart is always updated as more information becomes available. And this chart has been developed with and shared with other jurisdictions within Canada. This is the cold chain incident form that has been discussed a number of times. This is a new draft. It has fewer categories and it includes other providers like doctor's office, pharmacy, private immunization service, First Nations. The categories allow for more incident analysis, but reduce the chance for errors completing the form. The key feature in these forms, obviously, is what was the temperature, how long was the vaccine at that temperature. Without a correctly completed form, this form is so important for all of the decisions that are made. Without a correctly completed form, it's difficult to make any decision about vaccine usability. If you have any information, additional information about the incident and how it occurred, then you can add that there. And you're just going to make a quick note about what action was taken. Health unit information, again, very important. This information is all analyzed when it comes in. So maybe there's a problem shipping vaccine to a particular health unit because of the mode of travel that's used. If the health unit field isn't filled out on a form, then that information is never going to be discovered and there can't be any changes made. Also, please make sure that you're noting your name and a phone number where it's possible to reach you and a fax number. If there are questions about what happened in the incident or if there's a change for some reason, then you would be contacted. And there's a double signature that's needed here with your biological product consultant and same contact information for there. You're going to note all of the different vaccines, number of doses, the lot, the expiry date of that vaccine, whether or not it's usable is going to be noted here. And then there's going to be initials from the BPC who will say, yes, I determined that that's still usable. And if necessary, you can use more than one of these if there are a number of different kinds of vaccines, so more than you could list here. As mentioned, a field return form should then be completed for vaccine that is deemed unusable. So you do the cold chain form, cold chain incident form, you hand it to your biological product consultant. They look at the vaccine stability chart and nope, we can't use this vaccine anymore. It's got to go back to the pharmacy. You're going to fill out a field return form, fax it into the folks at pharmacy, and it's very simple. You're just filling it out. A little different than the cold chain incident form because in this case, you actually just look down and find what the name of the vaccine you're using is there. There's a number of codes that are important. A is cold chain incident power outage. B is equipment failure. C, handling error. D, damaged product. E, expired product. F, surplus. And in that case, that vaccine would be going back to the pharmacy for redistribution, which we talk about in the expiry section. G is wrong product shipped. H is product recall by manufacturer. I is annual influenza harvest. J is cold chain incident in transit between BC CDC and the health unit. And K is cold chain incident in transit within the health authority. So you're going to fax that to the pharmacy once it's filled out, and they will fax you back a number and some instructions about how to send that vaccine back. If it's going back for this reason, if it's going back because it's surplus, then it would need to be shipped under cold chain incidents. But if the vaccine is being shipped back because it's unusable, then obviously maintaining the cold chain on its trip back to the pharmacy isn't that important. Thank you very much. That's it. Surplus vaccine is our next section that you will find listed. Thank you very much for being with me today for the final section of the cold chain breaks in the field.